Good morning, everyone. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. David Ferrucci, previously the Principal Investigator for the DeepQA Project and an IBM Fellow. While at IBM, he led his team to build Watson, a natural language processing system for reasoning over linguistic content. In 2011, Watson defeated two of the most decorated contestants of Jeopardy, a landmark event in artificial intelligence. Featured in Time Magazine, the New York Times, and National Public Radio, he was listed as one of CNET's top 10 most influential people in technology. Now, without further ado, Dr. David Ferrucci.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's see. Is this on yet?
Just press the switch.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes? No? There we go. That sounds good.
And one more.
So you want me to put another one on?
Yes, please.
So I have to put two on now. Think I could do this? How many, can you scan my brain, see if I have the ability or not? See if the right parts of my brain light up. How's that? All good? Thank you. So, I met someone out there in the little coffee space there, and he said, where is he? Is he in here? That he was a fan of mine, and he's an old AI guy. I'm an old AI guy too, and I titled this "In and Out of Jeopardy: A Journey in Artificial Intelligence." It's actually for me like a 30-year journey, artificial intelligence. So I started in high school. My parents had set up this goal for me: you're going to be a medical doctor, and that's what your life is going to be all about. And then in high school, I think it was junior year, I got introduced to computers for the first time, and I was just blown away. I took this summer computer course, and I walked out of the course saying, wait a second. I could just tell this machine what to do, and it's going to follow every instruction I give it. So if I could think of how to do something, I don't ever have to do it again. I could get the computer to do it for me. Is that how this works? This is big. I thought, who needs to memorize all this medical stuff? I could just get the computer to do this. I'm golden. So, by the time I was, halfway through my pre-med program at college, I said, I got to get out of this, and I really wanted to go into artificial intelligence, and sort of that's where it began. It was a lot harder than I thought it would ever be, but and it still is, but nonetheless, it's really been a fascinating journey. And when you think about artificial intelligence, here's one definition: the science and engineering of developing computer systems to perform tasks that, if performed by a human, would require intelligence. It's a task-based definition. I think it's one of the most powerful and useful definitions of artificial intelligence. In some sense, it stays away from really defining what intelligence is, generally and independently. But nonetheless, it sort of begs that question. Can you define intelligence that way? Can you get something less than a task-based view of intelligence? And back in the day, there was so much interest, and there's somewhat of a resurgence of that interest today, which is really exciting about it. And when I go out and look at what's been going on over the last 30 years in this space, some really powerful and interesting things have been happening. And one way to think about what's been happening in artificial intelligence is to think about it in terms of sort of knowing and doing. And, doing, I mean, like, can you get machines to walk and see and sense and catch and fly? Can you get it to do things? And so I went out and I just went to YouTube and I thought, what's been, I've had my head buried in a whole different part of AI. What's really kind of been going on there?
This regrasping consists of throwing and catching, which contrasts with traditional methods that maintain contact state.
Up in the air and then move to intercept it. This is an extremely dynamic task with a lot of uncertainty, but very fast dynamics. Yet, this technique for designing control systems.
You guys seeing that? I mean, those are three independent drones communicating with one another, throwing a ball up in the air and catching it. I mean, this stuff is really, for those of you who don't know about it. Anybody know about this? This is DARPA's Big Dog project. How many people know about this? You got a few out there. it's slipping on ice, and it's balancing itself, regaining its balance, and continuing to walk. How many people know about this? This is a robot you can buy, and you can program it. It hears, it sees, walks, it can feel reactive pressure. You have to program it to do anything smart, so that's the difference between knowing and doing. It's amazing, right? So, and I think it's just the beginning. I think there's so much going on in the machine learning space, in the sensing space, and the coordination and controls in the control system space. It's just more and more tasks that we target. We're going to be able to conquer, and I think you're going to see really amazing things in that space. Knowing is different. So, on doing vision systems, autonomous robots, question answering, and expert systems, things that understand knowledge and can communicate, make decisions based on understanding, reasoning, learning, and predicting, are more kind of the other side of that I labeled knowing here, and a little bit biased, but I'm going to use Watson to talk about this.
Watson. What is character? Right. The art of the steal. For 1,200. Answer.
So if you think about what Watson's going through, right? It's looking. It knows kind of where it is in the game. Obviously, it knows if it's ahead or if it's behind. It knows what kinds. It's hunting. It understands the board, what's left on the board, and it's hunting for particular clues. In fact, in this case, it knows about daily doubles. And like any good Jeopardy player, it's actually hunting for daily doubles because they're so important to the outcome of the game. It actually found one.
There we go. 1246, please. 1,246. Here is the clue in the art of the steal.
So now it's betting, right? And it's using a lot of information to bet. It's saying, what are my prior probabilities? What's the likelihood I would get a question like this right? So it's using that. It's using its state in the game. How far ahead or how far behind is it? So it understands betting behavior, and it's making predictions and making a decision. Now it's trying to understand the clue. So it's figuring out what's important about this question, what's relevant, what's irrelevant. How do I pick out the important pieces of it?
The ancient lyre of Nimrod went missing from this city's National Museum in 2003, along with a lot of other stuff. I'll take a guess. What is Baghdad?
So now what it's doing is it came up with a bunch of different hypotheses, and it's looking at all the evidence it collected for each one. It considered hundreds of them. And then it's computing a probability based on what it can understand about the evidence for the different answers. And based on that probability, it's coming up, with 32%. That line is the threshold. Now, this is a daily double, so Watson has to answer. So it really doesn't matter, but normally if its chance of getting it right, if its computed confidence was above that threshold, it would want to buzz in. If it was below that threshold, it wouldn't buzz in. So in this question, for example, had it not been a daily double, it would not have buzzed in.
Even though you were only 32% sure of your response, you are correct.
That's pretty cool, right? Yeah. So you talk about knowing things and playing games, and you think about intelligence. It's interesting to compare chess and just chatting, right? We think of chess as, wow, this is a really, really hard game, and you have to be really, really smart to play it. And when we think about chatting, well, it's the big deal. Pretty much anybody can, talk and have a conversation. But then when you peel back the layers and you think, wait, chess is this finite, mathematically well-defined search space. All the responses are grounded in these precise mathematical rules. There's this large but finite set of possible moves you can make at different points in time, and you can always have this really clear, crisp, unambiguous interpretation of what's going on. And you just have to be able to search that really large search space and consider, look ahead as far as you can, right? And when Deep Blue, IBM built Deep Blue, and that's basically what it would do. It has this really way of evaluating a board, but it would look as many moves in advance as it possibly can to try to figure out, what's going to happen in this game. And when you step back and you think about that, and you understand how computers work and how well the game of chess mapped onto, the strength of computers, you start to see, wait a second. Well, it's amazing to me, not that computers can play chess, it's amazing to me that humans can play chess, when you think of it that way. Human language is completely a whole nother story, right? The words and phrases, they don't have a precise interpretation. It's really very, very subjective. It's nearly infinite number of expressions, mapped to a huge variation in meaning. And that meaning is ultimately defined by the context and by the interpretations humans kind of come to agree upon. Right, so I'm speaking to you now, and I'm using words, and I'm using phrases, and I look out into the audience, and I see people, nodding. And so that gives me some signal that you actually understand what I'm saying. Do you understand it as I do, or as deeply as I do, or shallowly, or not at all? I really don't know. I have no idea if you're getting a word of it. But, I see a couple of nods, and I'm encouraged to move on. But, do we really know what those words mean, and do we know what those words mean to different people? One of the great stories I like to tell is I have two daughters, and a typical thing you'd see happen in the Ferrucci household was I would yell down to them, "You guys got to come down here. You got to see this. This is really, really interesting." And I'd be doing some, science experiment in the sink or making some mess, or, "You guys got to come down here. You got to see this. This is really, really interesting." Trying to teach them something. And this would repeat and repeat. And at the time, my younger daughter was about 7 years old, and I would call them down, "Come down here. You got to see this. Really interesting." And she stopped at the top of the stairs and she said, "Daddy, interesting things are boring." So, what she was doing is she had, through the contextual use of that phrase and the frequency in which she heard it, she had identified its meaning. And its meaning to her was boring. She really wasn't making a joke at all. And this is kind of the nature of language. Language takes on meaning as humans use words and communicate with them. So talking about meaning, so meaning has all these layers, and it depends on how it's very subjective. So, dealing with human knowledge involves deciphering meaning in any given artifact, whether it be a words or a phrase or a picture. So here's a picture of, you could identify it as a calculator with dice on top, and if you think of it in terms of computer terms, it's represented a bunch of zeros and ones. I mean, the computer doesn't really know what to do with this until you start programming it and telling it how to interpret it. But a human looks at that and it might say, well, at a very superficial level, I can see white, black, and red, so it's just a color-based interpretation. With object detection, you could say, well, I can identify a calculator and with dice on top of it. With a little bit more depth about how these things are used in the context of, a human experience, you might think about calculating the odds. The actual label this picture had, where I found it, it was labeled with winning. I mean, I wouldn't even associated that meaning with that image, but someone did. Another interpretation of that is human use of tools. Right, so different layers of interpretation, very contextual and very much related to human experience. What does this mean to a shared common human experience? And that's where interpretation comes from. Meaning is fundamentally subjective, and we the humans, are the subjects. So here's a phrase, "the bat was flying toward us." I just want you to kind of stop and think in your mind about interpreting that. And what you're going to see appear is two competing interpretations. And as the context kind of gets richer and richer, you're going to see how those interpretations can narrow down. So you have these flying bats, and they're coming toward us. Here you have, maybe your ex-girlfriend who's really mad at you taking a swing with a bat at your windshield. So there's another interpretation of the bat coming flying toward us. Another one is a baseball bat, right, swinging toward a ball, and then maybe the batter sort of letting the bat go and it's flying toward the stands. Billy ran as fast as he could. Still can imagine now Billy running away from the bat, but you can also imagine, Billy letting the baseball bat go and running toward the bases. He made it home safe. So it's still an ambiguous interpretation. Could have made it home from running away from the giant fruit bat. Could have made it to home base. Finally, he scored. And there you're pretty convinced, although some of you with a perverted mind might think differently, but at that point you've pretty much narrowed down what the meaning was. So you can see how as you add richer and richer context, what's going on is these words don't have sort of independent meaning. What they're doing is they're helping you navigate within sort of your cognitive, that shared experience, and eventually you're pointing to some experience that makes sense to you and say, okay, I've now assigned these words, I've confidently assigned to these words a meaning because they've lit up the right experience in my brain. Mapping from language to meaning can be very subtle. These are a few phrases I put into Google search for images, and I took the top few images that came up. It's really fascinating, right? I didn't do much to change the search terms. I said safe at home, a lot of baseball stuff. Home safe, got a bunch of, well, you see it there, safes where you put stuff into. I just flipped the words and said safe home, a completely different set of images. So it's just fascinating that just switching the words around, even with the same words, light up very different impressions or common experiences in our minds. So when we think about expectations for machines, machine understanding, I think we have to have the right expectations, and I have a point of view on this. I think computers may be trained, it's amazingly how well we can do this now, but computers can be trained to analyze data and detect human meaning, but humans are the source of that meaning. So how does it make these associations between these words and these images? Humans go and annotate these images and say, this is what this means to me. This is what this means to me. And if you do enough of these, you can train the computer to associate the features it sees in the image with the meaning, represented by the words that humans associated with it. Humans are the source, of that, ultimately of that meaning. So, another, parallel in my mind is like the meaning of music. And, there's this story about Tchaikovsky, where he was composing his Sixth Symphony, and this is actually a quote: "The idea came to me for a new symphony, this time with a program." In this case, he didn't mean a computer program, he meant the theme. In this case, with a theme. "The work will be entitled The Program Symphony No. 6. I have shed tears while composing it in my mind. I put my entire soul into this work. I love it as I have never loved any of my musical offerings. I have never felt such satisfaction, such pride, etc." And in the debut of the symphony, he played it for an audience in St. Petersburg, and they hated it. They booed, they jeered. They was like, this is just crap. And I was like, what? How can this possibly be? And he said, the audience must not have gotten it. They did not get the meaning of my symphony. And he went back and he thought about that, and he renamed it the Emotional Symphony. This is actually Koskos conducting a little piece of Tchaikovsky's Sixth Symphony. And just look at the emotion in the conductor's expressions and face. It's just amazing to me. So on the second performance, Tchaikovsky came out and he told the audience what this symphony means. This is about the cyclic emotions of life and death, the emotional trajectory people go through in their human existence, and performed it again, and the audience loved it. So what's interesting about that is that the human assigned meaning to the artifact. He advanced, what it meant to be human, how to interpret the things around them. You imagine if a computer, created variation upon variation of symphony, even mimicking those things that have happened before, which you could imagine programming it to do, would it have been able to assign meaning to it and change the way humans think? And I think that's a kind of very interesting way to think about it. Why is getting at the meaning so important? Why do we want computers to get at the intended meaning of artifacts, like language and images and things like that? I mean, in particular language. I mean, the healthcare bill is about 2,000 pages of natural language text. How many people do you think know exactly what it means? In 2006, the U.S. tax code was 16,000 pages. 2010 was 71,000 pages. 100,000 plus. There are hundreds of thousands of medical textbooks and journals, and the content is rapidly changing. Wikipedia is over 4 million articles. Written text encyclopedia was about 80,000, so Wikipedia is a phenomenon in and of itself. The internet provides access to the equivalent of millions of books. What does it all mean to me and my needs? How do we get at that meaning, and how important it would be and how incredible it would be to come to the machine with a problem, with a need, and for it to be able to match that need and analyze all that information and be able to come back to you and talk about what the knowledge that you need to appreciate to get your job done or do your task or to get your answer. So the notion of open domain question answering is, a long time classic challenge in AI. Just this idea that you can go to the computer, you could just explain what you need, your problem, just talk to it, and it can give you all the knowledge you need and answer your questions. And a long-standing expectation of science fiction, notoriously difficult in the general case, and frankly still is. Deep general language understanding is still actually unresolved. But it's interesting to think about, how it's just this expectation of science fiction. I mean, this is the thing you need to be able to do with computers. And one of the things I found at the beginning of the Jeopardy project at IBM, I sort of wanted to inspire the team, and a friend of mine found this this movie. How many people know about the movie Desk Set? One. 1957. How many people know who Spencer Tracy is? Okay, it's a little bit better. How about Katharine Hepburn? Wow, Katharine Hepburn wins. So you're not going to believe this, but this is a movie about basically a researcher from IBM going to a media company, like an NBC, although it's never named, because he created a question answering machine to help them answer questions. There were just general common sense questions about, common knowledge questions about what's going on. And Spencer Tracy is that researcher, and Katharine Hepburn runs the library service for this company. She has a whole team of people who are constantly researching things. This is the opening of the movie. Is that too funny or what?
Also the ability, Oh, geez, just answer the question, without the...
So in this scene, he's interviewing a human person, Katharine Hepburn.
Often when we meet people for the first time, some physical characteristic strikes us. Now, what is the first thing you notice in a person?
Whether the person is male or female.
You notice...
Whether the person's male or female, what's the big deal? Okay, that was a huge deal for us. In fact, when we were playing sparring games, you would think just getting the gender right would be easy. It's not true, right? I mean, you could have names like anybody meet Marilyn Manson? So what happens is that you just can't go by the name. You have to go by lots of other things. And the thing to appreciate is that, and this is a key point, is that if I can't do gender perfectly, say I build a program and Jeopardy questions ask for, he blah, 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 or she blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, so it's a he versus a she. And now I write this part of the Watson system, million lines of code, and there's a program in there that's supposed to do gender checking. Say, do I have the right gender? So it's not perfect. There's no way it's going to be perfect. What do you say, 85% accurate? Once I know that it's not perfect, I have to look at all the other clues in the question, all the other things that would help me triangulate on the answer. And I have to weigh the confidence of those things with the confidence of the program that tries to figure out the gender. So now I'm sitting here and there's a question, and it had to do with he, blah, 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 some charity organization, you know, yada, yada, for only so many years. And the answer was Richard Nixon. But Richard Nixon worked a lot with his wife, Pat Nixon, on this particular charity, et cetera, et cetera. And they were both strongly associated with participating in that charity. And so the computer got a lot of evidence for Pat Nixon over Richard Nixon. Couldn't really tell from the name, Pat versus Richard. Unsure in his own gender calculation, but really sure, you know, in all the other information that triangulated onto Pat Nixon. So I said, okay, Pat Nixon. Senior vice president sitting there during this practice game. We answer with Pat rather than Richard for a question that says he. He turns to me and goes, "You got to be kidding me. How stupid is this machine?" So, you know, things that look, and it's just, you know, things that look easy are.
What's unusual about the following sentence? Able was I, ere I saw Ella.
No, but I doubt that Napoleon ever said anything like that. Unless you mean it's because it's spelled the same way, backward and forward. Is that what you meant? What do they call it?
A palindrome.
I know another. Madam on Adam.
So this is just, you know, just incredible foreshadowing, right? I mean, you know, here he is, the scientist interviewing, you know, a really smart person. How do you think? How do you answer questions? What are you capable of understanding and noticing? Because he's going to go off and program a computer to do this kind of thing. So this was this movie was about. So it was, you know, just absolutely fascinating. There are other scenes from it that really mimicked what happened. Star Trek, of course, the computer's really smart. The infamous HAL, you could speak to it and answer your questions, or, you know, decide to destroy the ship. Knight Rider. How many people remember Knight Rider? The computer in the car talks to you, answer questions. What about war games? The computer in war games that needed to play tic-tac-toe to decide not to cause a you know, nuclear holocaust. And of course, second generation Star Trek, which I think is one of the next generation Star Trek, which I think was one of the really best representations of an information-seeking, question-answering computer. Is actually the dialogues that Geordi and Data have with the computer there are just amazing, and I think, gee, that would be really, really cool if we can do that. So, understanding whether questions are hard or easy really depends. It's not sort of obvious. So here's a question. The natural log of 12,546,798 times pi cubed divided by 34,647. Anyone? I'll give you 50-50. Greater or less than 1? Wow. Okay, you guys. So anyway, so a computer would find this very, very easy, and would come up with that answer, you know, in microseconds. Really not a big deal. So what do we mean? You know, what does it mean to say a question is easy or hard? How about this one? How much did the customer Charlie Jones spend at an electronics stores between January 2010 and 2012 for items that cost between $100 and $300? Anybody? Obviously, you don't know that, but even if you had a database with billions of rows, it would take you a really long time to kind of find an answer to that query. Computers are really good at this. Navigating tables of information, to go from names to purchase numbers to amounts and to do arithmetic. Answer this question really, really fast. How does it know Charles and Chad are the same? Well, you know, it would fail on that. If you put the wrong name in there, it would fail. Because it doesn't know they're the same, unless you gave it some rule that says Charles and, you know, Chad is the same. But otherwise it wouldn't know. But you know, humans, you know about nicknames, and you might do a better job at that. But this is exactly why when we enter stuff in databases, we ask for unique identifiers, right? Social security numbers or ID numbers or license numbers, so we don't exactly have that kind of problem. But humans, I think for the most part, one of the things that amazed me about the Jeopardy project was that humans have this opaque understanding for sort of how computers really work. And in fact, once the Jeopardy project was announced, a radio show host from actually the Bay Area called me. I was in New York, wanted to be live on the show, wanted to ask me about this thing. And so I got on the phone with him and he said, okay, so let me understand this. You put all the questions into a big table, you put all the answers in. When the clue comes up, you buzz in and you read out the answer from the table, right? I was like, no. I said, not only don't we know what the answers are, we don't even know what the questions are. And he said, wait a second, then how do you do it? Exactly. Now we're on the same page. Okay, but this idea that this is how computers do everything, big giant tables, you put the stuff in, you look it up. It's actually a lot more complicated than that. So here we have, the difference between structured and unstructured information. So if I had this question, where was X born, and I had this table, okay, I got people in column number 1, and I have the places they were born in column number 2, and if you give me Albert Einstein for X, and you tell me being the computer, I tend to identify with computers perhaps more than I should, but you put, the person is the X, Albert Einstein, and you tell the computer, when you get a question like this, when you see a question that looks exactly like this, where was person born? Look up the person in the first column, and the answer is in the next column. Great, SQL, simple to do. But when you don't tell the computer how to interpret the question, just a bunch of words, and you just have it read a ton of text, now what does it do? It might read, one day from among his city views of home, Otto chose a watercolor to send to Albert Einstein as a remembrance of Einstein's birthplace. Well, the answer's in there, but this is unstructured information, meaning there's no explicit semantics. The computer was not programmed to answer against that table in a certain way. It doesn't know what those words mean or how they even relate to the words in the question. How does it do that? Well, it has to know, what does born even mean? What does born have to do with a birthplace? What's a person? What's a place? What's going on here? I'm completely lost. What background information do I need to understand and answer that question? How about this? X ran this. So Jack Welch was the famous CEO of General Electric. Do I even know that X running something has anything to do with them being the CEO of a company? Computer doesn't know that, right? How does it know? If I tell it, I tell it how to use the table, but if I don't, I just say, X ran this, and it read, if leadership is an art, then surely Jack Welch has proved himself a master painter during his tenure at GE. I mean, what might it get out of that? It might get that Jack Welch was a painter at General Electric. Would it really be able to answer the question, did Jack Welch run that company? So it gets very challenging, as you could start to realize, when you don't have those explicit semantics programmed in. And this is why Jeopardy was a very interesting challenge to take on, because you had this broad open domain, so it asked about all kinds of things. There wasn't any way to pre-program it to answer the specific questions that would come up. You had complex language. If you're standing, it's the direction you should look to check out the wainscoting. Anybody? Just, if you know the answer, just speak right. Don't be shy. Down, excellent. On $200. Joshua, you going to pay her? You got $200 right there. Yeah, okay. In cell division, mitosis splits the nucleus, and cytokinesis splits this liquid Cushing the nucleus. Excellent. Seems this perp was the first murderer in the Bible, and to top it off, he iced his own brother. Excellent. I'll tell you, it was so cold today. How cold was it? It was so cold, I wish we were back in '64 when he was emperor. Hot times, if you know what I mean. Nero, there you go, for $1,000. And of the 4 countries in the world that the U.S. does not have diplomatic relations with, the one that's farthest north. North Korea. I mean, this is fascinating if you think about this. If you even just look at the first one, right? The direction. What's a direction? Oh, okay. Imagine this. All right, this would be the dumb way to do this, but this is how you kind of start off. So, okay, so I saw this Jeopardy question. It was about direction. I'm going to go and model direction for the computer. So let's see, what's the direction? Well, you could have north, south, east, west. Wait a second. I could have like everything in between. So let's do 360 degrees around a compass. But then I have up, down, left, right. I have like behind me, in front of me, right? Sure, I model all these directions. And then you get a question that says, this is the direction of fabric, blah, blah, blah. And I don't remember exactly, but the answer was grain. It's like, what? It's not a direction. Well, it is. So trying to anticipate all the different ways words are used across a huge variety of domains becomes a very difficult thing. So we weren't going to solve this problem by modeling all this information and building these explicit, knowledge models. We have to use existing knowledge, existing text, and interpret that text relative to the question. Seems this perp was the first murderer in the Bible, and to top it off, he iced his own brother. Well, okay, so now I want to figure out what's really being asked here. I'm referring to a perp. What's a perp? So, the normal thing is to kind of go through dictionaries and find synonyms and find associated words to figure out how to do the right kinds of searches and to get candidate possible answers and to check them. But what's a perp, right? So I go to a dictionary, I can't find perp. What about iced? The only dictionary I could find that had iced associated with murder was the Urban Dictionary. And the Urban Dictionary is like 50% pornographic, really bad to use on national, television program. So really high precision. You got to get a lot of these questions right, and we'll talk about how good you have to be. And really, really importantly, you have to, not only did you have to get the vast majority of these questions right, but you had to be able to know whether you were going to get one right or wrong. So you had to be able to tell the difference and associate a probability with your possible answers. So I got this answer, it's Christopher Columbus, and I'm 68% sure I'm right, or I'm 36% sure I'm right. How do you accurately compute that confidence, or you actually have a probability that you can use to decide whether or not to buzz in, or how much to bet? How many people know about Jeopardy and how it works, how the game works? Right, so most of you, right? So if you buzz in and get that question wrong, you lose a dollar value associated with that clue, and your competitors now, who had more time to think about this, can now buzz in and win that dollar value. So there's a real risk with buzzing in and getting that question wrong, besides the risk of looking stupid. And I used to go to meetings on a regular basis with senior vice presidents of IBM, and they would say to me, Ferrucci, you're mucking with the IBM brand. You better win. And don't look stupid in the process. Right, so this was a real and very serious challenge, and just to end the suspense, going into that game, we had about a 72% chance of winning. That was roughly 28 to 30% chance of me losing my job. So it was not. This was by far a slam dunk, and if you understand Jeopardy, you know actually how close that game really was. So broad open domain asks about all kinds of things, right, from people to animals, birds, products, diseases, objects, dishes, months, vegetables. Months. How do you get a month? All right. At least when a question asks for a month, try not to look stupid. Answer with 1 in the 12 months. Simple idea. Doesn't work. So what we would have to do is we would calculate everything probabilistically using the context to decide whether or not something even was the right type. And most of you are thinking, wait a second, come on. Months, right? So a question would ask for a month, and we would answer with a season. Because so much stuff in the clue pointed to both a month and a season, but even more so to the season. Because it was more general given the characteristics that were asked for, like a question, like for example, it's cold, and it's gray, and it's dark, and it's whatever. This month, during this month. An answer like winter when the answer was February or something like that. It looked really, really stupid. I'm like, it's asking for a month. Okay, let's not do this probabilistically. Let's not do it the way we committed to do it, which is, in the project. Let's actually make a list of the 12 months, and if it asks for a month, answer with the month. And so I remember this meeting with the team, and they were like, but Dave, we committed to do that. This is not the right way. We have to do this probabilistically. We have to look at possible answers and possible types, and we have to compute the probability that might be the answer and triangulate all this information, etc. I know. But we need another metric, which is stupid. So we need to measure the stupidity of an answer, and when it's asking for a month, and you're answering with something that's not a month, it looks really stupid. So, okay, fine. And we call those closed sets. Put a closed set in. If it asks for a month, make sure you answer. You can't do this for all types, but for months you could do this for 12 months. At least answer with one of the months. And then we got this question, Muslims celebrate blah, blah, blah during this month. The answer was Ramadan. It was not 1 in 12 months. I was like, never mind, I was wrong. Let's go back to the old way. So, and that's mostly how this thing worked. And in fact, you think, well, wait a second, Dave. In Jeopardy, if a category says U.S. cities, at least answer with the U.S. city. Don't fool yourself. Okay, Watson used statistical machine learning by playing lots of games and training to discover that Jeopardy categories are only weak indicators of their answer type. It was an indicator, but not as strong as you would think. So we hear questions like U.S. cities, and the answer was shuffleboard, the Erie Canal. Here's the category country clubs. Answer was a mace, a baton. Authors. Answer was the Book of Job, Romania. So all you wise guys are like, oh, Watson, come on, it was a U.S. city. How could you get Toronto? Well, there you go. So just understanding the question, this actor, Audrey's husband, from 1954 to 1968, directed her as Rhyme of the Bird Girl in Green Mansions. What is it asking for? It's actually asking for, if you would have proposed this as a database query and you had like IMDb, this is asking for the director of the film Green Mansions. But, that's not so obvious. It says it's asking for actor. The answer is Mel Ferrer. I mean, Mel Ferrer acted, but no one really knew him as an actor. He was a director, and he's director of Green Mansions. But what does the query even mean? So this is an actual parse of the sentence. So we had a parser to break the sentence down into its kind of grammatical structure and all its modification structure. So direct is the main verb and so forth. But what does all this mean? Right, so you have to get into, well, what is the direct like? Direct a movie? Nobody mentions a movie here. Guides, leads. What is husband? Do I even know what husband of means? From 1954 to 1968, a time, a duration, a year. Who's rhyme? A person, a bird, a girl, a character? What's Green Mansions? A place, a movie, a book, a house? Right? Remember that thing I did about, Johnny running home after the bat? All sorts of different interpretations of what's going on here. Which one do I go with? Do I have to go with them all in parallel? Can I even identify all these different semantic paths? Right? So even understanding the question is hard. So what were we up against? We had a question answering system that we've been working on for some years, and it's all the state-of-the-art techniques. Had been in a lot of competitions. We turned it on Jeopardy. So we just adjusted to understand the way they asked the questions. We turned the statements into questions to use all the machinery we had built and that we had very competitive algorithms relative to what was out there in the scientific literature and so forth. And we ran this on Jeopardy questions, and we got this confidence curve. What this says is that on about 5%, so the way to think about this is a little bit tricky. The way to think about this is, imagine running the system on 500 questions, and then what I did is, based on how confident the system was, I binned them. So this 5%, or the 5% of the questions the system was the most confident in answering. As it went out, it answered more and more questions, so the bin got bigger and it had questions in it that it was less and less confident in. So when the questions it was most confident in, it got almost 50% right. As you added more and more questions that it had less and less confidence in, it plateaued when it was answering, roughly 90% of the questions, only getting about 12, 13% right. That left a huge gap because up here is what we call the winner's cloud. So each dot in that cloud is an actual Jeopardy game. And what I'm plotting is the performance of the winner of that game. On the x-axis, I'm plotting how many questions the winner of the game got to answer. They were confident and fast enough to buzz in, first. Right? That's the x-axis. And then on the y-axis, I'm plotting how many of those questions that the winning player got to answer did he or she actually get right. So in the center of the cloud, it says the winning players are getting a chance to answer about 47, 48% of the questions, and they're getting 85 to 95% right. That's pretty good. The dark dots are Ken Jennings. Ken Jennings was just like an outlier. I mean, his buzzing ability, his ability to time the buzz, on average, he was taking 62% of a game. There were games where he took 70 and 81% of a game. And this is like, when you're just watching Ken Jennings play, you don't even know who else is playing. I mean, he just assumed he knew all things. And unfortunately for his competitors, he mostly did know all things, about 91%. It's kind of scary. So this left a huge gap between sort of the state of the art and where we needed to be, because you needed a curve that kind of cut across the winner's cloud. And also, even the shape of the curve was bad, because you think about what the shape of the curve should be. If you were highly confident that you were going to get it right, you would get it right. And as your confidence trailed off, you were less confident, and you would get more wrong. So a good shape for this curve would be like this, like where you were confident, you were getting them right, and then as you got less and less confident, you started to get them wrong. So it'd be like that, and it would cut across the winner's cloud to be competitive. That's what you wanted it to be. So Lincoln Blogs, Treasury Secretary Chase just submitted this to me for the third time. Guess what, pal? This time I'm accepting it. I heard it. Resignation is the right answer. So did you actually know the history, or did you use plausible inference? Plausible, yeah, plausible. So you sit there and say, so what do I mean by plausible inference? So either you're a history buff and you know what's going on here, or you use plausible inference. What kinds of things are submitted? What kinds of things are submitted that are worth talking about? What kinds of things are submitted when a president is involved? right? So what you do is you have this plausible inference, you narrow it down to a reasonable guess, right? Even if you don't know the history. So that's right, you get resignation. But when you do that plausible inference, you're using a lot of background knowledge. You're losing a lot of context to figure it out. So when we took this question, we asked the 6th grade, we got a very different answer. So like you, the 6th grade had no idea the history, and they used plausible inference, but their context was very different, and therefore they came out with a very different answer and request. So in May 1898, Portugal celebrated the 400th anniversary of this explorer's arrival in India. What? Vasco da Gama, that's right. And so the thing I want to point out here is like the difference between strong and weak evidence. So here we have a bunch of we could take this thing, we could break it down to a bunch of keywords, and we could search. And if you did this, web search, you'd probably get da Gama in the first few hits. You might get Christopher Columbus. You'll get a bunch of confusers. But of course, the challenge is you have to pick out of all the words you get back, what is the answer and how likely is it that that answer is correct? And we did that test, obviously. Now, Watson was not connected to the internet, so it wasn't doing web searches. It was using search, as I'll talk about later. But what happened, the challenge is that, even if the answer, 50% of the time is somewhere in the top 10 documents, where is it? And of all the things that are mentioned, how do I build my confidence that one is correct and the other is wrong? So to kind of point out this contrast, I'm going to show you this passage. In May, Gary arrived in India after he celebrated his anniversary in Portugal. What a great passage. It's got all the keywords in common. It's got Portugal, it's got anniversary, it's got May, it's got arriving in India, and obviously Gary is the explorer in question. And you say, well, wait a second, how do you know Gary's not an explorer? What do you mean Gary's not an explorer? Imagine the next sentence, and Gary returned home to explore his attic looking for a photo album. Gary is the subject of the verb to explore. That makes him an explorer. We're all explorers in our own way. But here a human looks at that question and says, wait a second, I've got a whole country celebrating an anniversary. This isn't Gary. Okay, this has got to be one of the 3 explorers I remember from high school history, Columbus, Magellan, or da Gama. We use different information. So here's the same question, but now a different passage. On the 27th of May, 1498, Vasco da Gama landed in Caput Beach. The only keyword in common here is May. Why would this even come up? Why would I even look at it? And that's where you have the real challenge that Watson faced, is mapping from the meaning, the intended meaning in the question, to the meaning in the passage without actually going through human meaning, without going through human cognition. So all based on the statistical use and context of the use of words. And this was Watson's big disadvantage. You're looking at those words and you're mapping to that shared human experience and you're making sense of it. Watson's saying, I just have a bunch of words and I need to look at the context in which they're used and do these more complicated matching. So for example, here there has to be algorithms that allow you to go from anniversary in 1898 to 1498, statistical paraphrasing. Are arrived in and landed in, used in similar contexts that allow me to match them? Are they synonyms? Can I find the path through dictionaries? Can I find the path by looking at, statistically speaking, the different contexts in which they're used in? Geospatial reasoning, here was where I could look this up in a database and say, well, Caput Beach, well, first of all, Caput Beach is a location, and India's location is Caput Beach in India, so if I arrived in Caput Beach, if I landed in Caput Beach, I arrived in India. Right? Then I come out with Vasco da Gama might be the explorer in question. Now I can, looking at tons of text, I could get more evidence that Vasco da Gama is considered an explorer, at least more so than Gary. So I can build more, so I have 2 answers, but in one answer I built more reliable confidence than the other answer. So making connections. On hearing of the discovery of George Mallory's body, he told reporters he still thinks he was first. What's interesting about this question? Anybody know the answer, by the way? Edmund Hillary is the answer. But there's what we call a missing link in here. to get this answer, you have to kind of navigate out from the various concepts and find sort of the missing link, the thing that ties two parts of the question together. In this case, it's Mount Everest. George Hillary's body was found on Mount Everest. Who was first at Mount Everest? It was Edmund Hillary. So this starts to suggest a very different and interesting paradigm. And many Final Jeopardy clues were like this, is that you had to actually find the connections between things, and you had to rank those connections as you've gone, because I'm sure George Mallory was associated with other things than Mount Everest. But which one is going to help you make, that connection? Very interesting. A lot of people think that Watson kind of had an understanding of the world, and it could reason about that understanding. And that's just not true. It's just not the way it worked. And as a classic AI person, I love doing things like that. I love sitting down and saying, how do people think about this, or how do they think about that? And building an ontology, a model of concepts and relationships. And then giving the computer rules so it could reason over that model and make inferences. It didn't work that way. There was too much knowledge to encode in that form, and that process is slow and tedious. Building that, what we call domain theory, is hard and difficult because humans have to sit there and interpret the world and write down these concepts and these relationships and these models, build and build and build. Now, we did try that for small subsets of things where we get things wrong. Like, here's this question. This 18th century character studied medicine knowing it would be useful in long voyages. Well, Watson was getting this question wrong because I couldn't find anywhere where it associated a quote with that quote with a character. But if it knew that from a quote you can navigate a relations like in, so that quote in and go to a book, and then you can navigate like 18th century and go from a year in the 18th century to a book, and then from that book you can go to a character, and then you make the assumption that if I find a character in a book and the book was published in a time and that character was in the book, then it's possible or likely that that character in that book said that quote during that time. So that's a rule I can associate with this model. It's not a sound rule. It could be wrong. It's like a plausible rule. But it allows me to go from just having a quote to a character, during a particular time. But I would have to have that model. If I tried to capture all common sense knowledge in this way, it took a very, very long time if I tried to do that manually. So we couldn't really do that. Watson didn't do that. But we did try a couple of these things. And the problem is, so they worked in theory, but the likelihood that a question would match one of these models, very, very low. Very, very low. So it didn't have any significant impact. So we knew that these large handcrafted models will not work. We knew we had to get intelligence from many diverse methods. So many different algorithms working on different parts of interpreting language and connecting it all together and learning how to balance those various algorithms. And we knew that if we were going to look at many different possibilities and look at different interpretations and different algorithms, slicing and dicing the interpretation of those paragraphs and those answers in different ways, to answer in reasonable time, we were going to need a massively parallel computer. So we knew we couldn't build these handcrafted models. We needed many, many different algorithms that looked at different features of the possible answers and their supporting evidence. And we need a parallel computer system to actually win at Jeopardy. And this is a high-level architecture of how Watson worked. And while I can explain this to you, we at IBM, we had worked on a really great video. I worked on it myself with a production team. Came out really great. So I'm going to use that and show it to you.
How Watson answers a question in 4 not-so-simple steps. The first person mentioned by name in The Man in the Iron Mask is this hero of a previous book by the same author. This is a typical Jeopardy clue, presented in a tricky Jeopardy format that can be pretty difficult for a person to understand, much less a computer. Remember, a computer understands code, ones and zeros, not nouns and verbs or people and places, let alone the relationships between them. Watson can't see or hear, so audio and visual questions are off limits, but everything else is fair game. And of course, it's impossible to know everything. As Alex Trebek often quips, the hardest Jeopardy question is the one you don't know. How does a computing system reach a single answer to clues posed in human language? Unlike traditional databases designed for computers, real language is implicit, ambiguous, and full of complexity. That's one of the reasons why, until now, computer searchers have only spit out documents filled with keywords. It's been up to us to find the answers in those documents. Like our brains, Watson's knowledge base is entirely self-contained, except while our brains fit in a shoebox. Watson's brain takes up more space than 8 large refrigerators. When Watson answers a Jeopardy question, there is no internet or helpline, so Watson consumes a steady diet of information to prepare for a game. Watson needs to absorb so much information because Jeopardy is open domain, which means he can ask a question about anything. So Watson reads, analyzes, and tries to understand millions of books and documents, content written in the way humans communicate, before it gets anywhere near a game board.
Near internet-sized information, about 100 gigabytes of text. But then Watson would pre-analyze all that text, trying to interpret it and build data structures that represented an understanding of that text. And that was about 10 times as big. So the amount of information it had was about a terabyte of analyzed content. And then, in order to do it fast enough, on 2,880 cores working simultaneously, it used 15 terabytes of RAM. It never went to disk, because going to disk was too slow.
Never before in the history of computing has a machine been able to so precisely answer such a wide breadth of questions in such a short time. Let's see how Watson does it. Step 1, question analysis. The first thing Watson does is parse the question into its parts of speech and identify the different roles the words and phrases in the sentence are playing. This helps Watson determine 2 distinct things: what type of question is being asked, and what the question is asking for. During this early stage of the process, Watson doesn't know how to find the best answer yet, so it increases its chances by looking at many different options of what the question might be asking for. Step 2, hypothesis generation. For each interpretation of the question, Watson quickly searches through hundreds of millions of documents to come up with thousands of possible answers. At this point, quantity trumps accuracy. It's more important for Watson to generate a large number of possible answers and narrow them down from there, because if the correct answer isn't included during the initial sweep, there is no possible way for Watson to identify and justify the right answer at the end. Step 3. Hypothesis and evidence scoring. Of course, it's not enough for Watson to just come up with answers. It has to support and defend them. So after downgrading obviously wrong answers, Watson finds passages from many different sources to collect positive and negative evidence for all of the remaining possibilities. Watson understands these passages having learned the relationships between words. Relationships such as books have heroes, or authors create characters. Scoring algorithms then rate the quality of this evidence based on everything from the source material's reliability to whether the time and location appear correct. There are still hundreds of possible answers left, so thousands of algorithms work in parallel to score the evidence for each and every one of them. Remember, this must happen in seconds. Step 4. Final merging and ranking. Different types of evidence are better at solving different types of questions. So just like a person learns from practice, Watson uses the experience it gains from trying to answer similar questions in order to weigh the importance of its different types of evidence. It's not about memorizing trivia. By playing thousands of practice games, Watson learns how to weigh, apply, and combine its own algorithms to help decide the degree to which each piece of evidence is useful or not.
So this is one of the main applications of machine learning in Watson, was that when you had all these different algorithms that were looking at different features of evidence, like looking at it syntactically, looking at it semantically, looking at it from a perspective of like negation or the presence of keywords or relationships between different parts of the text, the association with different concepts, all these algorithms would look at that from different perspectives. How do you weigh those various algorithms? They're all kind of voting in some sense. Well, I'm 30% sure this answer is right based on this piece of evidence. I'm 60% sure. I'm 80% sure it's wrong, and so forth. How do you weigh those? It's like to make a decision, having lots of people kind of giving you input, how do you weigh their input? And by running lots and lots of games, the machine learning would learn the weights for those various algorithms. So we can create many, many algorithms and let the machine learning, based on training on old games, figure out how to weigh those various parts. It's kind of like in your own brain, you have different, different ideas. Which one do you trust and which one do you not trust under different conditions? It would train to learn that. So I'm going to stop it there because I'm running out of time. But ultimately, the answer that had the greatest greatest confidence would be the answer that it would answer with only if that confidence was above that threshold, as I had described earlier in the presentation. I'm going to skip this and just kind of get you to a conclusion here. So after we had about 25 AI scientists and software engineers at a bunch of university partners, we performed over 8,000 documented experiments as we developed and advanced hundreds of different algorithms that we integrated into that architecture, and we would continually train the system to adapt those various algorithms and how they worked. And over that period, we eventually got to this performance, which is cutting right across the winner's cloud, and is very competitive. And as I said, this gave us around a 70 to 72% chance of winning against top Jeopardy players. And the way to read this is, if it answers between 60 and 70% of the board, it would do roughly about 90% precision on average. Of course, it would depend on the competition, it would depend on the board, it would depend on daily doubles and lots of other variables, but that's roughly the performance we went in with. You already heard, computer versus brain, completely disconnected, 2,880 CPUs, 80 kilowatts of electricity, 20 tons of cooling. Human brain fits in a shoebox, powered by a tuna fish sandwich and a glass of milk, hand fan. This is kind of, and the rest was history. So I'm going to close with, I have a lot more I can talk about, but I'm going to close with this last slide, which is, when I reflect back on what was really important about what we did, I think a triumph for general intelligent systems architectures. We didn't go there thinking we're just going to build something that plays the game of Jeopardy. We went in there thinking, how do we deal with natural language? How do we deal with large volumes of language? How do we answer questions in general? Can we come up with a general architecture that generated hypotheses, gathered evidence for hypotheses, scored that evidence, and was open-ended to new ideas and new algorithms? A triumph for combining a diversity of methods. So lots and lots of different algorithms working together, very reminiscent of Marvin Minsky's Society of Mind. There was no one algorithm that knew how to answer the question. There was no one algorithm that understood the question. I think the other important thing is it's changing the expectation of the human-machine interface. And what I mean by that, I don't mean about GUIs. I mean, how do we imagine humans and computers working together? I think we grew up in this world where computers were just always right, either answering math questions or looking stuff up in databases. And we just expected them to give you precise, perfect answers. And I think one of the things that Watson did is it started to change the way the public started thinking about what computers could do, right? They can come up with probabilities, confidence levels, things that help guide us in the right direction, by doing things more probabilistically, which I think for many, many hard problems, that's just the reality. There is no perfect evidence for any given answer. And the role of computers in healthcare. And I think that's related to the last point, which is, what I personally experienced was the healthcare professionals, as a result of this, started to think differently. They were very much against these kinds of systems, and I think as a result of this achievement, their attitude became, this is inevitable. It's inevitable that computers are going to be an extended memory. They're going to be able to process much more information than we can. They're going to deal with much more breadth, and they can calculate the odds of things based on what they understood. And we have to learn how to interact with computers in areas like healthcare and in many other areas. So thank you very much.